All right, chapter 2 continued. Change of scenery. I did smoke some weed, so we'll see how this goes. Finishing up chapter 2, Strange and Awful History, Murat Allsted, 1902. From under a large stone protruded the arm of a white woman, while just on the other side of the stone lay a native woman, her hands entirely burned away and her arms charred far beyond the wrists in a vain attempt to raise red-hot mass from the body of her beloved mistress. What devotion that could endure such fearful suffering at panic-stricken moment? But a yard or two further on lay 20 or 30 Negroes, trusting that if they could keep together, some must escape. And on white woman, faithful servant and abject Negro alike, the poisonous fumes and the fiery rain brought unendurable suffering, leading to painful death. Through the middle of Place Burton, where the night before lovers had strolled and children played, ran a hissing, boiling stream of mingled mud and water, all that remained of the river Guyave, but in a short time before a rivulet of beauty. This boiling water, here and there convulsed and thrown up in a jet of steam laved with venomous, touched the bodies of those who so short a time before had floated upon its limpid waters. Great trees with roots upward and scorched by fire showed the course of the famous Rue du Aube, and huge stones, still hot in blocks of volcanic debris, gave a titanic fearsomeness to the scene. It is very hard to comprehend that such a reign of terror has taken place as that of which news came from the Caribbean islands in May 1902. No one knows or ever will know how many thousands of persons were destroyed in St. Pierre, but a conservative estimate is 30,000, some say 40,000. At the time at which the multitude died is placed at 3 minutes. There was a cloud of fire streaming from a new crater of the old mountain, and the people perished in the sulfurous fumes and flames and consuming fire and suffocating gas. They had a good telephone system in Martinique, and when the question was asked whether medical help was wanted, there was no answer. The people of St. Pierre were dead and the wires were broken. Businessmen and many cities anxiously awaited advices from their correspondents in St. Pierre and got no letters. The agents were dead. There are so few living witnesses of the catastrophe that it is of interest to hear what was seen and heard 40 miles away. Here's a passage. Quote, a report from Barbados says that the sky was heavily overcast, the heat was excessive, and there was a distant sound of thunder. Later, early in the afternoon, dense darkness set in, and a great quantity of vivid dust fell and continued falling until late hour. The souffle had been in a state of violence for 9 mornings, and it all seemed to be merely preparatory, and then came at daybreak heavy thunder and great storms of lightning, and presently there was a continuous, tremendous roar. Vast columns of smoke rose over the mountain, becoming denser and denser, and the scoria-like hail, changing later to fine dust, fell upon the adjacent estates, destroying a vast amount of property. At Chateau Belair, the ashes were 2 feet deep in the streets. In Kingston, they were fully an inch deep, and many large stones fell into the parish of Georgetown. What do you know? Jesuit Georgetown, 1902, Martinique. The earth shook violently, and at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, sorry, I lost my spot. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a midnight darkness spread over the country. 30 people are known to be killed, and the damage to property in the Windward district was very heavy. It is not denied that one man in St. Pierre who lived in the city through the horrors of the hard eruption was a black criminal in a jail who, because he was violent, had been placed in the dungeon below the level of the sidewalk. He heard the rumbling of Pele and felt the tremor of the earth and realized that something extraordinary was going on. He was panic-stricken with fear and beat with his hands against the walls, but only succeeded in getting open a door leading into a cell a little larger than his, over which there was an iron grating looking up through the sidewalk. He stumbled into this apartment to find it half filled with a sifting mass of hot ash and dust. It burned him severely, and he was not slow to retreat back to the inner cell from which he had just escaped. Then came the awful silence that seemed to paralyze him with fear more than the first roar. He has since said that he lay on the floor of his dark cell for hours, scarcely daring to breathe, oppressed by the terrifying silence. He does not know how many hours he lay there. Finally, he summoned up the courage enough to open the cell door and look into the other apartments. He was met by a wave of dust that choked his mouth and nostrils and half blinded him. It had cooled, and he had ventured to wade through the soft, flake-like mass toward the iron gratings, through which descended a constant shower of soft and almost invisible dust. He hallooed aloud again and again. At every echo, his voice seemed to increase the shower through the grating. Hunger and thirst overcame him, and he crept back into his dungeon to sleep, but he could not. He says he did not close his eyes from the moment he heard the terrifying roar of the volcano ball until on Monday morning, 4 days later, when his shrieks were heard by the first party of searchers to invade the stricken city. Remember what we were just saying about the number 4 in the Far East and the natural order of things. And I can't remember if it's in this book or not, but spoiler alert, this black dude that's in jail ends up joining Barnum and Bailey Circus and like telling his story like for the rest of his life. It's pretty wild. The charming daughter of the consul of Italy to Barbados was visiting with friends. Wait a minute. Hunger and thirst overcame him, and he crept back into the dungeon, messed it up again. His cries were feeble. By this time, he had almost despaired of liberation. A marine from the French cruiser Suchet heard Stardout's wail and tracing it, rescued the one living creature in the city. The bars of the grating had to be pried open, and Stardout was dragged out, more dead than alive. He was found not only to be on the verge of death from starvation and thirst, but suffering from terrible burns about his legs and the lower part of his body. The charming daughter of the Consul of Italy of Barbados was visiting with friends. The Italian consul had been among the first to come to St. Pierre and search for the body of his child. Strangely enough, it was his fortune to identify his daughter's remains beyond peradventure of doubt. The explosive blast, which had reduced wrought iron machinery to pulp and heavy masonry to powder, by some strange freak had left intact a bit of needlework and garment of French make, which told the consul that he had found his own dear one. The dead bodies of a team of horses and the wreck of the Volante, which had stood directly in front of the house where his daughter was a guest, told plainly enough the story that had been about to start for a drive when the storm of death swept through the streets and blasted them with its fire. A businessman had visited St. Pierre sometime before the city was smothered, and is very interesting in describing the people whose fate was to perish. He wrote, "The natives here are optimistic regarding storms, all appearing to think the last hurricane had visited them. I was in St. Pierre 2 days. Subsequently, I toured the island. The natives are very interesting. Their artistic natures are highly developed. Negroes form the great majority of the population of St. Pierre and all other towns on the island. Even now, the fear of Negro uprisings is never entirely allayed on account of the antipathy existing between the whites and the blacks, although the last insurrection was as far back as 1841. Most of the modern city, although the buildings are only of 2 stories on account of recurring earthquakes, there are 2 parts of the town, the old and the new St. Pierre. The old being given up principally to the cabins of the Negroes. Most of the people on the island live in small towns. The industries are the cultivation of the sugarcane, coffee, and fruits, and the important article of export is the Martinique rum. The volcano, which has 3 craters, is northwest of the city. Usually at least one of the craters is moderately active. The center of the island is entirely volcanic. The chain of islands being of volcanic origin, I believe confidently that someday the entire chain will be submerged." And this was just a couple days before it happened. This is from a journalist that was there, or an author or something. And the baptism of fire came. With a mighty roar that seemed to shake loose the foundations of the universe and stun earth and sky with its deafening reverberations. A pillar of smoke and fire shot out of the crater of the trembling mountain high into the air. The crashing thunder followed up peal with peal and was multiplied 100-fold by the echoes from earth to clouds and clouds to a sea. A moment of silence succeeded this, and then came an answering roar, an appalling sound composed of the shrieks and cries and moans of 30,000 human beings who saw their doom upon them. There was something strangely lacking in this composite moan of terror, and all the thrilling death cry. There was no bellowing of kine or barking of dogs or any other sounds of the lower animals. Birds and snakes had left their haunts and fled for safety long before. Cattle and horses had stampeded wherever they could. Only a few house dogs remained, and these in this awful moment whined at their feet of their masters. Man alone had stayed to reap the penalty of his temerity. A mighty suction seemed for a brief space to draw every living thing toward the mountain and to draw the souls of men from their bodies. The grass and the trees bent their heads with scarcely a rustle, low toward the monster of Mount Pelée, and in that silent rush of air the shriek of the multitude died away in a low moan. A green phosphorus filled the atmosphere and threw a ghastly glare upon the faces of the stricken people, the shroud of death. The silence became intense. Nature's heart, for one terrible moment, seemed to cease its beating. A huge rolling cloud that had for a brief instant hovered at the mouth of the crater now began to unroll like a black curtain down the side of the mountain. One of the most startling descriptions given in a few words of Pelé's outbreak was in saying it was a crown of fire, a corona, quote unquote, crown of fire. The further statements were made that a great waves of fire seemed to hedge about the mountaintop. Such thunder has seldom been heard by man, cracked and rolled. Ashes and rock as well as lava were carried skyward in this column to deluge the island and end the ocean for miles around. Gradually, the column mushroomed at the top, spreading out into dense clouds that descended to bring night at noontime. Those who saw the eruption from sea say the masses of fire fell from the sky. The red-hot cinders that followed the lava kept falling till 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Mount Pelée, which is cultivated in spots up to a height of 2,500 feet, is usually covered in large extent with dense forests containing wonderful variety of woods, oaks, cedars, mahogany, silk cotton, ironwood, and palms. The view from the peak is thus described by an enthusiast: valleys and hills, peaks and ravines, succeeding each other swiftly as surge succeeds storm, surge in a storm. A weirdly tossed world, but as beautiful as weird, all green in the foreground, shadowing off to billowy distances of the purest blue. All right, that's the end of chapter 2.